My first episode of the Uncommon Dialogue podcast. Today's guest is my friend Nicholas Guibert, lawyer, libertarian, somewhat of an atheist, I guess. Depends what day of the week you want to ask him.
Maybe on Sunday.
And Nick, thanks for coming. First episode. I appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's a pretty laid-back podcast. We're just going to shoot the shit about what we've always done, about stuff that's concerned us, and yeah. How's it going?
It's going. My first question is, where can I find your podcast?
uncommondialogue.locals.com. That's the paywall right there, but I will have it available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify as well pretty soon. Garnering, as soon as I get everything going, it's just going to be on there, and I'll give you promo codes and stuff. Obviously, you're a friend, so don't worry about it for a while. But you want to give a quick backstory of who you are and where you grew up and whatnot? And
yeah, so I'm originally from Michigan, but was fortunate enough to travel the world as a child, thanks to my father's numerous assignments across the globe, and got to see a lot of different things, and always had to watch what I said to people and understand people, and understand that people were different than me. And in order to be able to engage people, I had to really understand where they came from. And so that has always given me an interest in the social sciences and in history. And so I'm, somewhat of a history buff. And the aspect of history that I'm interested in is the relationships between people. And I think that also applies in business, which is an area where I've grown into. My first profession was engineering, and then from engineering, from the intellectual property aspect of engineering, I grew into the law, and through the law was really introduced in earnest in business. And so a lot of business people come to me, and I'm a technical consultant and a business consultant for people. And from the first day I met you, I never really had any trouble speaking to you. You and I like to shoot the breeze a lot, and
yeah,
the topics are so varied, and the topics are, very intellectual at times, and not so intellectual at other times. And I've learned a lot from you, and consider you a really good conversationalist and a good friend.
I appreciate that. That's the best compliment I've heard in a long time myself, personally. But, I'll tell you what, the probably last best compliment I've heard was maybe a week ago when somebody told me, they're like, you know what, remember a while ago, it was somebody I was having coffee with, they were like, a while ago when you told me, like, probably not be so paranoid about COVID anymore and just go outside again. Because really, like, what's the worst that's going to happen? Like, everything else that's a risk in the world, just go outside and just go do what you want to do. Mm-hmm. You're exactly right about that. And I was like, yeah, that's what more people not just should do, but, like, ought to do. Like, if you really do want to, like, achieve a certain level of satisfaction with your life right now with how things have gone over the last year, you just got to go and do what you ought to do, which is go live life. Step outside the house and just stop being afraid of stuff.
Yeah, you can't live life afraid. Everything's a calculated risk. When you think of taking an airplane trip to Miami, the most dangerous part of your trip is not the airplane ride to Miami, it's that drive to the airport. And we'll drive to the airport, which is 20 minutes away, mm-hmm. or to the grocery store without batting an eye, and yet it's the most dangerous part of your day.
Yeah.
So that's a calculated risk, and you're not going to stop driving around town because it's dangerous.
Sort of how, like, that photo I remember showing you once is that dude inside the Whole Foods who was wearing a whole damn scuba suit.
Yeah.
With the oxygen tank as well. And it's like, dude, like, you got a higher chance of getting hit by a car than you do catching COVID inside of a fucking scuba suit.
No, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true.
Yeah, it's just weird how paranoid it made everybody, like, right away.
Yeah. Well, it's not just individuals that are paranoid. Unfortunately, it's also our institutions that have become paranoid. It's also our leaders that have become paranoid. And in some ways, they're setting up a system that is and assumes paranoia. And anytime that you have a system that assumes paranoia and tries to combat paranoia, it often becomes very paternalistic.
Yeah.
And really the nightmare of a libertarian, you know.
Mm-hmm. For anybody watching that just doesn't know what libertarianism is, could you just give a brief rundown of what it is?
Yeah, so libertarianism, especially the brand that I'm the most interested in, which is the Night Watchman Libertarian, it assumes that government is minimalist and doesn't intervene in the private affairs of its citizens, but is a bulwark, a stopgap for things that individuals cannot do well. So, for example, the military, to a certain degree, the police, diplomacy, management of natural resources,
The courts.
the courts,
Yeah.
the courts. That's a big one. The enforcement of contracts, the existence of individual property rights. They're impossible without a. They cannot be properly administered on a large scale without some kind of public body, or what the Latins called res publica, the public thing, a republic.
Yeah.
And so public lands management, Clean Water Air Act, those sort of things that private individuals can do, but there needs to be some kind of slight public oversight in order to ensure some sort of fairness. But that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you start getting areas where the government knows better.
Assumes it knows better.
Exactly. That was
Yeah.
that was a little tongue in cheek, but but yeah, you start getting into areas where they start taking your money to be able to redistribute it inefficiently, of course, and it becomes creeping socialism. So to what degree or how much socialism will you tolerate is the question today.
Not enough people are asking that question, though. I don't think.
No, not enough people. Well, what's happening is that the newer generations who haven't lived through the Cold War and haven't seen the existential threat that was made to this country, the United States, they didn't live through that. They didn't live through a possible final countdown. They didn't live through Ronald Reagan moving Pershing missiles into West Germany in order to, in this game of one-upmanship with the Soviets, who decided that they were going to move, SS missiles into East Germany to make the United States cower.
Yeah.
These were actual real threats of socialism. Now, the threat of socialism today is not necessarily on a military level, and maybe not on a international external level. It's a little more insidious. It's internal on a societal level, on a economic philosophy level,
and cultural level,
and
as well.
and to a great extent, cultural assumption level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With it growing at the rate that it is, it just seems like the individual himself is losing everything that he or she knows what it is about themselves and can only identify themselves, or rather being told to identify themselves with set group A, set group B. It just doesn't matter. Like, this is the group you belong to because we said this is a group you belong to, and you, the person yourself, is just not really applicable for anything.
Well, if you think of it, there's a French political philosopher. His name is Frédéric Bastiat. Mm-hmm. He wrote this book called The Law, La Loi, and he wrote it in the 1850s, and he wrote precisely about the overarching unifying characteristics of most socialist systems. And one of the things that he mentions is this socialist attitude about lumping and grouping people into groups and not treating them as individuals, treating people as masses, treating people as as pawns that can't think for themselves. And so when you come into a juncture in society where individualism is being stomped out, both culturally and intellectually for people, you start to see the possible excesses that come with socialism, because essentially what Bastiat says is that the attitude of the legislator is paternalistic. We know better than you. We are the government, and we will tell you what to do. You cannot decide anything for yourself. We know better, and we're going to pick winners and losers, whether it's through taxation and economics, or bar you wholesale from certain types of activities and say you can't do things because you belong to group X or you belong to group Y.
Yeah, the problem with that people think it's a good thing because you're supposedly making opportunities for everybody else at the cost of another group. But the problem is well, if you just have one person that wants to do what they want with whatever it is that they want to do, as long as it's not hurting or harming anybody else or anything or any property, there's just that government that's in the way, which is also that collective body or people, really, they're just saying, no, you can't do things. This is our way of doing things, and you can't go against the grain, not even 1%.
Yeah.
It almost seems like COVID was the perfect storm for that last year.
Well, COVID was an excuse for a lot of laws.
Yeah.
It was the excuse for raiding the Treasury in many ways. It was the excuse for shutting down restaurants and justifying, most importantly, justifying the jobs of bureaucrats. Mm-hmm. We're here to protect you.
Yeah.
So you got into an area where the government said, essentially, we're going to repurpose the main functions of several of our departments. Let's say here in the state of Michigan, the Department of Education here in Michigan, or the Department of Health and Human Services here in Michigan, had a particular mission pre-COVID. Health and Human Services was to we can choose one function, for example, regulate nursing homes or regulate healthcare. To regulate healthcare. Well, during the pandemic, just like the Department of Education, its core mission was repurposed from we're here to regulate a certain area of law and help people to we are going to first and foremost make sure that you are safe from this pandemic. Well, that's great, but there should be one agency that does that.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe. But essentially you get areas where my children were kept from school for almost a year, in some ways needlessly, because the agency that ran their schools mm-hmm. was concerned with keeping them safe instead of educating them.
Yeah.
So the idea was that what they probably should have done is educated them and then found mitigating ways to educate them. But their primary mission needs to remain educate them. They need to go to school.
Yeah.
You have a whole generation of kids that essentially lost a year.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't even imagine being a parent in a time like this and having to deal with how do you juggle your responsibilities of being a provider while also being a parent at the time when you're supposed to be the provider.
Oh, this is a very crucial question for parents, and it was hard for dads, but for women, we've set back women's rights 40 years because most women, and let's be honest, it fell on primarily on the women in our society, here in the United States at least, mm-hmm. to juggle this. Dads to a certain extent had to juggle it too, but really the moms took the lead on this.
Yeah.
And how many single moms had to make, essentially babysit their 5-year-old kid who couldn't really stand in front of a computer for 8 hours a day instead of going to kindergarten and actually hold down a job. It's impossible. It's impossible. She was essentially tied to the house.
Yeah.
And so what does that do? What does that do for this equal society that is being espoused, where women have equal access, equal opportunity? It's an opportunity killer if you're tied down to the house.
Yeah, it is. I mean, because you can't really explore any opportunities for yourself to improve your situation, whereas you have a pandemic happening that's already just eliminating so many people's opportunities to create wealth for themselves. And meanwhile, you have somebody with a situation like that, which they don't even know what the hell to do. They don't know what the hell to do. And I think there are still people right now that still don't know what the hell to do. I mean, they sit around and it's like some of the schools are already closing again.
So case in point, countless board of educations erred on the side of safety because their new mission is to keep everybody safe. But they should have erred on the side of sending the kids to school and then possibly doing some mitigating actions in that context. You know, they erred on the wrong side, thereby imposing and making it impossible for a large segment of our society to function properly, to function the way it was functioning, which is, you know, in a progressive way to try to promote equality and opportunity for everybody. But if you tie, you know, whether mom or dad down to home and they have to do the job of teachers,
then what are you left with?
What are you left with? You're turning back the clock at least a couple of centuries where people were home educated.
Yeah.
And all the consequences that come with it.
Yeah. There are plenty of consequences that come with it. I just don't know enough about that. I'm sure you know more than I do. But it really does just seem like the entire collective body of government just said to everybody, hey, look, all of you individuals cannot make choices right now pertaining to things. And
we know better.
We're controlling your safety as well as your freedom as well. Whereas somebody like me, not tied down with familial responsibility, but it makes me think, man, if I had children, like, I'm still in charge of the house. What do I do? How can I have or let a whole collective body of people tell me how to run my life? I know how to do things. I need to do things. Or else there's a mysterious unknown there that I just don't want to go through because somebody else is telling me this is the path you're going to go on, and that's it. It's like, well, what are the consequences? Don't worry about those. You'll be safe in the beginning, the process, and the end. And it's like, no, I'd rather take a risk and leave the house and maybe risk COVID just so I could provide for myself and for my family as well. I'm glad I'm not in that position, to be honest with you. But
so I mean, you have a case essentially where you had an emergency, a bona fide emergency in the first month. And what is the nature of the emergency in this crisis? The nature of the emergency was that the hospitals did not have the public health plan in place to make sure that they were not overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So maybe the emergency can last 1, 2, maybe 3 months. But don't you think that after 3 months, even with or without a vaccine, that now as a hospital system, as a healthcare system in general, nationwide, that now you are on notice. And now you will marshal the resources necessary in order to make sure that you're not overwhelmed. After 3 months, after 90 days, and that was essentially the law here in Michigan, right? Mm-hmm. After 90 days, it's not likely that there's a quote-unquote an emergency. Anything that you've extended and any measures that you've claimed are emergencies after that is essentially bureaucratic overreach because you've assigned to yourself a certain a mission, right? A paternalistic assignment of mission that I am here to protect you.
Like you anointed yourself.
You've anointed yourself. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
You've taken it upon yourself the mission to keep everybody safe when at the end of the day, we are a society where people need to make choices. And even here in America, it's even more marked because we are, at least we were, an individualistic society where the emphasis is on the individual and individual choice.
I mean, this goes back to my all-time favorite book, A Conflict of Visions by Thomas Sowell. I know you've seen the interview. Yes. I don't know if you've read the book at all yet. But he talks about people with the unconstrained vision and those with the constrained vision. And it was like people like me that said, like, all right, this is a bad situation right here, but I'm going to take it as it is and try and still maintain some level of normalcy, operate my business to a level of normalcy, conduct life to a level of normalcy.
And take precautions.
Take precautions,
and be mindful of others.
Yeah, be mindful of others, yeah.
Of course.
But, like, those with the unconstrained vision were just like, no, we're just going to wipe the table clean. These are our rules right here, and we're just going to go full speed ahead no matter what the cost is. And it's like, yo, that's very dangerous. Not just rhetoric to espouse that, but it's the notion and the thoughts behind there are just so damn dangerous. Because it's like eventually you got to pull the brakes at some point and say this was too much right here. Yeah. But they don't see that. People with the unconstrained vision of how things ought to be in their worldview is that we are always right because we simply anointed ourselves to be in this position, and that's it. We're going to go full speed ahead, and you can't say anything about that. That is so dangerous on so many levels that too many people don't realize that until after the damage is done.
Right, because they've given themselves, if you want to use a little bit of philosophy, Jean-Jacques Rousseau talked about the lawgiver when he was talking about the republics and how the will of the people needs to be taken into account. Well, the mechanism that he gave is this one person called the lawgiver that is essentially a benevolent tyrant, if you will. Well, who is the lawgiver, and how do you choose a lawgiver, and how long does the lawgiver get to wield that power? All those questions are unanswered, and essentially these people have anointed themselves because they got elected to office. They think that they can play the role of the lawgiver, when in reality they're here for public service. They're here to actually listen to the people, right? Not tell the people. And there's some pretty interesting windows on what can be done, by these people. So in some countries in Europe right now, today, and so what, we're April 2021.
I know the UK is in complete lockdown still.
They can't go past 10 kilometers from their home. They can't be out more than a half hour to an hour outside of their house. And most importantly, in Europe, they can't leave. If they want to leave Europe, they can't leave. It's like this big giant prison.
I don't know, man. I got some friends of mine that live in London that I've seen it on their Instagram stories. I'm not going to snitch them out, but they've been going to places. They've been walking around. Yeah. They don't care.
And London is technically not the European Union.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot about that. They did leave, actually. Yeah. But it just seems odd that they left the European Union because they didn't want to be bogged down by the rules of everyone else, and yet their rules are probably the most stringent in Europe.
Right. And you think of one of the reasons why they're so locked down in Europe right now is that the European agency in charge of, vaccine approval essentially sat on the approval process for months and didn't streamline anything. They wanted to go through, that process as rigorously as possible. But the problem is that you need to work for people. You don't need to work for your process. Right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that the United States did well was to streamline that process and say, okay, there's a public health emergency. The only way out of this is through a vaccine. We are going to leverage all the previous research, and we are going to do the best we can to cut out all the red tape and put the right people on it right now so that we can crank out an approval as quickly as possible without compromising safety.
I've told you this before privately. I'm not an anti-vax person.
Yeah.
I think personally anti-vaxxers are fucking crazy.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. But, and I'm not even against this vaccine, but don't you think a vaccine passport is a little bit of overreach and invasion of privacy for people to go where they want and do what they want as they please?
It sets a dangerous precedent.
Yeah.
That's the problem with it. I do see, okay, if this were the Black Plague and it had a very high mortality, death mortality, mortality rate, I could see where you would start to require it, because anywhere you go, you come in contact with people, you could probably kill them.
You're donezo, yeah.
You're donezo. But when you think of what this particular virus and its mortality rate, you're more likely to be struck by lightning than to die from this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So again, the the answer, it depends. It's a matter of degree. It's a matter of situation. And I don't think that there is enough justification for this particular disease to require a vaccine passport.
Yeah.
You know,
I'll tell you what, it seems odd to me that so many people are just so willing to just go ahead with a vaccine passport. And it's like, dude, do you understand, like, you're being rubber stamped with a digital piece of tech, like, you know, like a digital app that,
yeah,
you know, you basically lost a little bit more freedom as an individual to do what you want. Because now all of a sudden you reach the gates of Yankee Stadium or wherever you want to go, to Madison Square Garden or here, not Joe Louis Arena, the Little Caesars Arena, and you bought the ticket already, and they're telling you, well, you don't have a vaccine passport. We can't let you in. It's like, I still paid for it. Like, do I get a refund? I mean, there are all sorts of implications. I don't think people realize, like, how nasty things can get.
Yeah, because the next thing is that, you know, do you have a certain type of genetic mutation? You know, what they're doing here is that they're establishing that a certain health condition regulates whether you have access to certain public infrastructure. Because let's be honest, airlines and ports and airports and roads and so on, all that is public infrastructure, right? It's in the public domain because the public domain uses it or is the best way of regulating the use of it and making sure that there's fair access. But if now you predicate access on a certain health condition, you're opening the doors for all sorts of abuse. Yeah, down the line.
So it's a little depressing when you think about it, because it's
right.
like, well, all of a sudden, I've been seeing the memes on Instagram and elsewhere of, like, you know, basically people are going to start carrying papers like they did in, you know, the era of World War II, when certain people had to carry certain documents around them just to indicate, like, who they were and, like, what they were.
Yes.
And America wasn't founded on that. I mean, you just went and just became you, the person who you are.
Right. As long as you didn't bother anybody, you could do anything that you really wanted.
Yeah, I mean,
right? You know, that's the individualistic freedom, and in some ways, American exceptionalism for the longest time was that you had certain guaranteed individual rights, and you had a government that was there to help you and otherwise stay out of your business and let you run your life, let you run your business, because you as an individual know best what's best for you and your family. And you're free to innovate. You're free to make money. You're free to help others. You're free.
Yeah.
Right. You know.
I mean, in all seriousness, when you think about it, it's just like, dude, how does the government even know to make millions of decisions across the board, across different areas, for millions of different people that have different circumstances? It's impossible. The only thing that they did to basically streamline that was to introduce possible, like, notions of, like, hey, this is a vaccine passport right here, and this is a clear yes or no choice right here. I mean, to all of a sudden tell people, like, you have to, like, get this thing right here, or you can't go to the mall, or you can't go to the shopping center, you can't go to anything. You're limiting the individual. That's what it comes down to.
Right, and what you're doing is that you're saying to them, we're taking away your choice, and we are assuming that you are not smart enough to see that this vaccine is actually good for you and good for the people around you. We're assuming that you're too stupid to see it. And we're assuming that again, the population, instead of looking at them as individuals and seeing that, hey, you can make that individual choice, we're grouping you as a mass and saying, citizens of the United States, we're making the decision for you. You have to all get it. Otherwise, you can't function.
You know what really pisses me off about those with the unconstrained vision, and it's kind of obvious, like, who I talk about when it comes to those with the unconstrained vision, is that they're literally anti-choice with virtually everything.
It's a form of intolerance.
It's a form of intolerance. I mean, those with the unconstrained vision of reality literally cannot stand that I can just make a decision for myself that's different from them.
Just remember what Albert Whitehead said, that just to paraphrase, essentially that all of Western philosophy is just but a footnote to Plato. But what is one of the main things that Plato has in his vision? One of the main things that Plato has in his vision is that everything is preordained and that everything comes from the top.
Yeah.
God is the ultimate decider. And so what happens is that some people anoint themselves
to that level
where they're going to make all the decisions. Everything is command economy, command society, command education
to be whatever direction it wants.
And
to
there is no tolerance for any kind of variation. And remember, we need to evolve as a society, granted. But remember, what's the main hallmark of evolution? Genetic variety, mutation, non-orthodox genome.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You have a normal genome, and then there's an outlier, a mutation. It's an opportunity to grow.
Yeah.
Right? So if you squelch any kind of variation of opinion, if you squelch any kind of variation of ways of doing things, of conducting your economy, you're going to get no evolution. You're going to get no evolution whatsoever.
Yeah.
You know? None.
I mean, just look at like education now. Like, dude, look at the University of Michigan. They're not allowing students on campus or in the buildings or anywhere unless they get the COVID vaccine.
Right.
And it's like, at some point, somebody's just going to have to say, like, look, I'm paying this ridiculously high tuition, and you're not letting me in the very place I'm paying all this money for.
Yeah.
Don't you think there's a case to, like, let that person in because they paid a financial, and there's a financial incentive behind the university to say, like, well, look, we get what we're doing and all, but, like, this person is paying money and they are a customer just like everybody else.
Yeah.
We need to let them in, whether we like it or not.
Fortunately, that customer also has the choice to say to the University of Michigan, I'm not interested in your service if you don't let me in, regardless of whether my status is. So there's still a solution, fortunately. But the day where there is a monopoly of universities and you have an assigned monopoly, an assigned university, let's say in public schools, for example, you have an assigned school, and let's say the day comes where you can't go to a school different than the one that you're assigned, then it becomes a really big problem. Yes.
It almost seems like we're heading down that road anyways.
It's possible,
I mean, some people are just so in tune to like where they want to go that they really don't care like about other universities at all. But yet, like, you do bad on a test or an exam, the SAT or ACT, if they're still even being done these days. I have no idea. But it's like, at some point, I see it now, like, and I've heard about and I've read about how some high schools are telling some students, no, you can't go here because of A, B, and C. Whereas, like, they'll tell you, like, you could go here because of X, Y, and Z. I mean, it's almost like reverse affirmative action, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's I think he's at NYU. There's Professor Scott Galloway. Have you ever heard of that?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
There's a couple people I'm familiar with, but like not.
He was saying that there's a big cull coming for the universities.
By cull, what do you mean?
In that there's going to be essentially probably 30% of the universities will not make it past the pandemic.
I'll be fine with that.
And part of the reason is that there's been no innovation in their product, and most of all, they've opened the door for people to see that they're not really offering any value add to their life. I'm thinking a lot of these small liberal arts colleges that don't have a really deep applicant pool are essentially they're charging a lot of money for something that hasn't changed in over 40 years.
Yeah. You're talking about the actual diploma. That product has stayed the same, while the cost of it has gone up dramatically. Dramatically,
with no actual value add. And essentially, people are seeing that it can be replaced almost entirely by online courses.
Yeah.
And so the premier...
They're being shown for free, by the way.
Right. And they're being shown for free. Think of MIT courseware, for example. But the big schools, especially like the Ivy schools, the premier schools, are really going to have no trouble getting applicants, continue access to continued quality applicants. The second tier schools are going to have to reach into their wait lists.
Yeah.
The third tier schools don't have a wait list, and which means that their student bodies are going to automatically shrink, which means that their cost per student is going to skyrocket, and it's their business case is not going not going to be
Well, yeah,
justified.
because eventually those leftover students will leave. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, for anybody that's never taken economics really is a great equalizer. And the
Microeconomics especially.
Yeah, and it's also like the great educator as well, because it's funny how when people realize like that never took economics, how suddenly smart they became once all of a sudden it started mattering to their money.
Yes.
And not nobody else's. Once it started hitting their
Yeah.
pocket, people become very smart very quickly.
Yeah.
But I mean, it goes back to what you were saying, like education now is just basically all indoctrination and no innovation. See, you're 100% right. I mean, with the exception of the last 20 years, which there has been innovation coming out of universities, like prior to then, there really has been very little. It was all done by the individuals.
When you say innovation, you mean research.
Yeah.
What I mean by innovation is innovation in the educational product for students. That's what I mean by innovation.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, unfortunately, all this matters, and why does it matter? Because it seems to me that we almost have a caste system.
Oh, 100%.
A caste system where the caste that you are in is determined by the university that you've gone to.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way in hell that somebody that went to Oakland University, which is where you went, would ever have a chance of, I don't know, having any type of connection to somebody that went to Georgetown or UVA or NYU or Harvard. There's no chance in hell that would happen. I mean, most people know that. Most people that went to Oakland know that. Most people that went to Harvard, Georgetown, UVA know that as well.
Well, the thing is that I do have connections with people that have gone to those institutions, but those people have connections to people that are willing to open their wallets much more readily to them than they are to me.
So it's a financial. It's more like a financial.
It's a financial and a power thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think of all the different graduates and the list of graduates from Harvard, they read like a who's who of business, whether they graduated or not, right? You're thinking of Bill Gates and Larry Ellison, who went to Harvard but didn't graduate. But just the fact that they went there, they got to know the right people who have access to the right financing and so on. And so what you've done is that you've created, because they went to that institution and they're part of that club, you've created a caste system where you have others that have good ideas also knocking on that door, trying to say, hey, what about me? Well,
what about you?
What about you? Where did you go?
Yeah.
It's unfortunate.
I mean, I think if you were to ask like 10 people on the street if they'd rather hire somebody with a degree in mathematics from, I don't know,
Michigan
State, Western Michigan University.
Yeah.
Or whether they would hire somebody with a degree in gender and women's studies from fucking Northwestern University or Stanford. Yeah. Most people would probably pick the name school with the bigger name, which is unfortunate, but that's just what it is.
They've built those universities, to their credit. They've built their brand.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's good for them. But the issue is that there is no alternative power brokerage circuit for people that didn't go to those universities. There needs to be some. I have great ideas too. I'm perfectly capable of running a good business too. Mm-hmm. But it'll take me a little more in order to get access to the right people, unfortunately.
Isn't it odd though that those at these higher ed universities preach that type of stuff, like, oh, we need like a more balanced playing field, but it's like, well, you guys are the imbalance. You're part of the imbalance. You guys are preaching about we need to make it better, but I don't see you guys actually showing to make it better. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like, how often is it that you'd see like a Harvard grad married somebody that went to Eastern Michigan University? You just don't see that shit. It just won't happen. There's a book I just remembered right now. It's called The Big Sort by Andrew Sorkin. I don't know if you ever read it.
No, I haven't.
But he talks about how basically people are separating themselves willingly based on the profession that they hold, and whether they would like marry or build a family based on the person with that same exact profession as them. Yeah. So it's like becoming like really commonplace now to see lawyers marry lawyers, doctors marry doctors, small business owners marry small business owners.
Well, I mean,
this really only started in like the late 80s, early 90s, and it's just basically accelerated since then. Because before then, and he has the statistics to prove it, I can't remember any of them off the top of my head, but like he said, it was like in an earlier era of America, it was really common to find somebody who was a small business owner, be married to somebody who was a doctor, and they raised a fine family.
So I don't necessarily have a problem with those people's choices.
Yeah.
And they can marry who they want, and we're individuals, and that. But where I have the problem is upstream, is that a lot of these people are byproducts of a certain educational system that has indoctrinated them to make these kinds of choices.
Yeah.
That's where I may have an issue.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it just doesn't help that you have people graduating with the degrees of like as I said, genders and women's studies, or like fucking yellow dance theory, or what have you, or what have not. Degrees that I've never even fucking heard of before. Half the people I've never even heard of the disciplines that people are getting awarded degrees in, and yet it's like they go out into the world. It's like they can barely hold a job at Starbucks because they're getting screamed at by somebody who can't make their latte correctly.
Right. So the issue here with that is actually it comes down to economics. There's a student loan crisis in this country because people get degrees that are not marketable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they get degrees essentially that they can't afford, and the schools know that they can't afford, but the entire system is being doped by the good faith and credit of the U.S. government and the student loan program, where there is a disconnect between the marketability and your ability to pay back using that degree the education that you got for that degree.
Yeah.
And the actual funding of that degree. So right now, student loans are non-dischargeable, which means that the lender takes zero risk. They don't have to assess the marketability of your degree. They'll just give you the money, you sign for it, and then essentially you're a financial slave for life because you can't discharge any of those loans. By and large, there are ways, but for most people, you can't discharge those loans in any kind of bankruptcy proceeding or any kind of situation where it's difficult for you to pay back because the degree has not been analyzed for marketability.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
and so people will scream, well, what people should be able to get any kind of degree that they want and have the opportunity to get a degree. Yes, to a certain extent, if they're able, once they get that degree, to actually shoulder the cost that it took to get that degree. It's like giving a loan for a jumbo house to somebody that you know can't pay it back.
Yeah,
that's predatory.
It is, yeah.
And so our student loan system is predatory.
Yeah. I mean, at a certain point, though, I will go back to the individual choice, is that some students just eventually got to realize, man, I really need to work a lot harder somehow to get into an engineering class or two instead of taking a freaking, the life and times of said agricultural plant in fucking Virginia Beach.
Yeah, that nobody cares.
That nobody cares. You know what I mean?
Nobody's going to pay you $1 for it.
Nobody's going to pay you a damn dollar for it.
Yeah.
I mean, if people really, and students especially, realize that, but the problem is that, they're being fed so much bullshit from these universities that they really do think that they're just going to leave and they're going to get hired left and right. There are going to be offers for them left and right, and it's just going to be an easy ride after that.
Right, because they're being fed the myth of do what you love instead of do what you're good at, that you can do, that everybody wants, that nobody wants to do for themselves. Right?
Yeah.
That's where you want to be. You want to be in an area where there's no competition, you are the best at it, and that you're actually good at it. And by the way, by and large, for most professions, you'll end up actually probably liking it if you're that good.
Yeah. I mean, if you're good at it, you're going to make money. And either way, as long as you're making money and saving the money at the end of the day and being able to pay off your bills and whatnot,
you can transition to something else.
I mean, there's very few worse positions to be in than to be financially burdened, especially by student debts. I mean, what's the number at now? It's 1.4 trillion.
Yeah, it's pretty high.
Dude, that's astronomically high. I don't see no way that half the graduates in this country can even pay those numbers back. I mean, the other half maybe if they really hustle for it.
Yeah.
But
it's a form of financial slavery for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me weird, like seeing people graduate and then all of a sudden like think of themselves like, I have to become an activist now because we were all done. And we got fed lies that by mysterious financial institutions that we were going to get these jobs and we're not getting them now. I mean, like, what do you even do about that? Like about these so-called like education activists that want to call it free education. What do you do? You make it free, like everybody's going to start going, and eventually, like you just watered down the competition even more.
Right.
You know, if everybody got degrees, nobody's really marketable at that point. The whole point of getting a degree was to like stand out from the crowd and get paid a little bit more. But if everybody gets degrees because education's free, nobody's really going to be like standing out, and you're not going to get hired.
Yeah, one solution is basically to make these loans, especially loans that are considered predatory.
Yeah.
And you can create criteria for that. Make those dischargeable.
Yeah.
And then make sure that future loans, are not awarded or given without precisely that economic analysis of likelihood of being able to shoulder that cost in that profession.
Yeah, I mean, the other problem is that the universities themselves, from like a top and like middle level and on down to the students, that they've basically turned into like activist organizations as well. I mean, it's pretty clear. Everybody knows that like what direction most colleges and universities lean. Everybody knows it.
Yes.
But it's like when they're thinking of themselves as activist organizations, and you're going to have somebody like me just say like, no, I need an education. I'm paying this much money. I don't want to be told stuff and then be mad about it later at some person I've never met in my life, probably will never meet. I mean, the universities are like notorious for this, and most people probably don't know is that, you get to college and it's like all of a sudden, like, as Thomas Sowell once said, like the more in one direction that universities and colleges lean, you tend to see students separated by groups versus the other direction where you'll see students just mingle freely amongst each other.
Where they have the free exchange of ideas and have some semblance of tolerance for
anybody else.
Extraneous ideas or non-standard ideas.
Yeah.
Which gives you that opportunity for evolution again, right? And we're coming back to not being treated as a group, but treated as an individual.
Yeah.
Right?
And when these graduates leave, and especially like the so-called journalism majors, when they leave and then get a job at, the usual suspects, New York Times, Washington Post, all of them, they think everything is just grouped together all over. And it's like, no, like when you get out to the real world, people just make transactions with whomever they want, whenever they want, in any type of way they want.
Sometimes randomly.
And when people like that graduate and get these jobs, they all of a sudden anoint themselves almost back to what you said, to politician-like thoughts of thinking, I need to put these articles out there to get my ideas out there. And it was always assumed that people, like graduates, would get out into the real world. They would all of a sudden like start to revert back to normalcy, like in their mind, and think not everything is that bad. My situation could be better, but it's really not that bad. They're just not doing it. They're not going that way. And we're starting to see it now, like in the media, of course, but like even outside of like technology, you walk around and like you see the political stickers everywhere, and people wear them like a badge of honor almost. And I'm not like optimistic about the future of education in America. I'm just not.
Well, maybe technology is the answer,
I mean, in one sense, I hope not. In another sense, I do. But it's like when you have like the major power players controlling the flow of information, I mean, at some point, somebody's got to say, like, man, this just can't strictly be like this. Like
are you talking about data hoarding? Is that what you're talking about? Where the large technology providers, social media, search engines, and so on, hoard information, treasure troves of information on individuals? Is that what we're talking about?
And like basically crafting a whole narrative around things to get people to go in one direction.
Right. Well, there are several models that are competing models that are out there. The American model is that the companies own all that information, and oftentimes they know more about the individual than the individual knows about themselves.
Yeah.
And it's happened, actually.
It's pretty scary.
It's pretty scary, but for example, in Europe right now, they're considering a different model where the technology players, the technology players don't own that information. That information is actually stored by the state. Mm-hmm. And so all
that's just as scary too in one sense.
Well, it's scary in a different way.
Yeah.
Right? What if the state is no longer so benevolent?
Yeah.
Right? But essentially what they're doing is that they're putting into place an infrastructure for centralized concentration of that information. That individual companies can collect that information, mm-hmm. but they have to actually send it and store it, and they don't own it. And the individual supposedly owns it,
but
the government has custody of it, or at least the quasi-government entity that's meant to equalize everything for all the different technology players.
Yeah.
Actually has custody of it. Mm. It's a different way of seeing things.
Yeah, it's a different way of seeing things. And the problem is that, like, when you have one of these, like, politicians in Europe just all of a sudden anoint themselves to that level of thinking, I simply know what's best just because of the position that I'm in.
Yep.
I mean, in one sense, I don't blame them because it's like they have a job to hold, and maybe because they have to pretend to be certain in order to gain support for that.
Yeah.
But, like, somebody's got to stop and say, you know what, like.
But the good news is that assuming that the government doesn't go crazy, or assuming that, for the U.S. that these companies see that they're going to actually end up squelching the goose that laid the golden egg if they squelch all individualism out of society.
Yeah.
If they do see this, technology does remain an answer to our education problem, honestly. Why? Because Thomas Friedman, for example, wrote this book, I think it's 2004, maybe 3, The World is Flat. And he talked about how kids in India now, because thanks to the internet and thanks to technology, now have access to the same exact education mm-hmm. sitting in Hyderabad as some guy sitting in Lexington, Kentucky.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, technology becomes this enabler for delivery of education, where a lot of these institutions lose a lot of their current inherent power because of, regionalization.
Yeah.
Because of, their brand name. The brand name starts to not matter anymore.
Yeah.
Or at least much less, right? The kid can actually go and get a autonomous driving or image processing course from MIT courseware, mm-hmm. like that.
And then get a job at Tesla.
Get it for free in many cases. Or he can go to Cal Poly and get access to their courses, probably for a small fee.
Yeah.
But my point is that the technology has become this great equalizer. And what's amazing is that in the history of man, most technologies are double-edged, in that they have this tremendous possibility for great good, but also this possibility for evil.
Yeah.
You think of nuclear fission, the nuclear bomb, but you also have nuclear power, which may, in some ways, if implemented properly, without dual-use technologies, may actually solve our environmental problem for generating clean energy.
Well, yeah, because you won't have solar panels and wind turbines everywhere.
Most of all, you won't have greenhouse gases. Yeah. And as long as you know how to recycle fissile material, you're golden.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you think of these dual use technologies, and fortunately, in the great history of man has always chosen to use the good side of technology.
Yeah.
And so you have things
until recently.
Well, even recently. I mean, there's been an explosion. There's been a huge explosion in the use of technology, and overwhelmingly, the record shows that we always choose
the upward trajectory.
Yeah. Now, there have been cases where we haven't, right? And we've paid for it.
Yeah.
Atmospheric testing of nuclear bombs, for example, caused the strontium problem that Linus Pauling talked about, which was essentially the pollution of bones, instead of having calcium being put in bones, the decaying strontium was being put in bones, and the strontium would decay as it was replacing because of the atmospheric fallout of nuclear stuff. But
I think that's one of those things that whoever's going to listen to this wishes they didn't hear about.
Right. Well, he solved the problem. Linus Pauling essentially became a crusader and solved the problem. And today there is no atmospheric testing of nuclear bombs. It's always
that's good.
It's always underground because of him, because he found this problem, right? And but initially we didn't take the high road on it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But my point is that this technology, what it's doing is that for example, you think of the development of autonomous driving. It's solving a lot of it's going to solve a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But it also has the opportunity to be a power grab. The day that you no longer are allowed to drive your own car and that you must use autonomous driving technology to go somewhere, it opens the abuse, for example, for the government saying, no, you can't go to the stadium on Fridays.
Yeah.
And they won't, and the car will not go there.
You and I have talked about that privately before, and that's just like an incredibly
It's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary, but guess what? I predict that with very few exceptions, that will never happen. The government has no, and us as a society have no interest in telling you, Lance, that no, you can't go to the stadium on Fridays. It's just not going to happen. Right?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I don't like in terms of like the cultural aspect that technology has had is like basically made most people hysterical armchair activists.
Interesting concept. Can you develop that further?
I mean, you go on Facebook. Well, I don't have Facebook anymore. I got rid of it. I couldn't stand to see people typing in all caps about all kinds of stuff about social justice initiatives. And I'm like, man, like for one, like you're not even making any type of legible sense. You're just venting basically on your keyboard, all the while thinking you're actually like helping yourself out by venting on there. All you're doing is just turning yourself into like a digital Incredible Hulk, because you're just going to get more pissed off the more you see stuff on the internet. You're essentially feeding yourself the same fuel to the fire you're trying to extinguish by just venting on Facebook or Instagram, whatever. I mean, people are so like, the other thing about technology is that it's made people like attached to labels, which digital armchair activists basically love using and putting out there on their stories all the time, day after day, day after day. I mean, dude, I get on Instagram sometimes when I wake up in the morning after I brush my teeth, whatever, just to look at like what's going on or just to see messages from people and whatnot. And I'll click the stories and it's always like the political stuff first. And I'm like, man, nobody's trying to see this at 7:30 in the morning when they're eating eggs or working on the gym. Nobody's trying to see that garbage, man. Put that shit up in the middle of the day when I'm on lunch, or not even like, don't at all. I prefer, but like if you're going to, like, man, put it at a time of the day where most people like won't see it. Like,
so why don't we talk about the root cause of that, right? This digital armchair activist.
Yeah.
This is a byproduct of an intersection of one, access to technology, which is ubiquitous nowadays, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay. But the thing is that you're talking about a series of people that now have the notion and the concept that the goal of society is social justice.
Yeah.
Okay? Social justice is not
true justice.
It's not true justice.
Yeah.
Okay? Social justice can be an ends, okay? Not a goal, but a destination that you need to go eventually. But the thing is that it cannot be the means. And for a lot of people, they use it as the means to get there.
Yeah.
Right? It just cannot, it cannot be. The ends cannot be the means. It just doesn't work. And why? Well, the fact of the matter is that social justice is only possible when there is some modicum of prosperity. Nobody cares about social justice when the wheels have come off of society and everybody is struggling for basic subsistence. Like, some of the first things that go, for example, are women's rights.
Yeah.
So, and you think of 5th century Rome. You had a society prior to that was fairly progressive in terms of women's rights, and then the barbarians came, destroyed the empire, and all of a sudden, within the space of a generation, no women's rights.
Yeah.
It was essentially the strongest man actually wins, right?
Yeah.
And it was the power grab. the barbaric power grab, the brute force ruled.
Yeah.
Right? And there was no social justice. It was, I'm stronger than you, I have a bigger sword, and I'm going to cut your head off if you don't like it. Right? So the only way that you can have prosperity, and the only way that you can have social justice is that if you ensure prosperity, because prosperity lifts the boats for everybody, and it allows people in power to say, okay, we're going to let go a little bit of our control, let go a little bit of our resources, let go of a little bit of what we have to allow the great masses to actually partake. And at that point, when you have the resources to do these great initiatives, then you start to get social justice. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that that's how the world works, but that's effectively how the world works. You need prosperity in order to have social justice.
Well, yeah, because you're not seeing social justice being enacted by people at the bottom in places like Venezuela.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a victim of creeping socialism.
Yeah.
Right? And Venezuela, and I'm glad you mentioned Venezuela, because, when we talk about the evils of socialism, we teach in this country the great part of socialism, which is, a
social safety net. Maybe.
A social safety net,
Yeah.
taking the extra resources that the well-off have and redistributing them. It's all about redistribution, right? Taking those and giving them to people and offering them free health care, free this, free that. But the problem is that we don't teach the second stage of socialism. The second stage of socialism is that those who had extra resources no longer have any more resources. They've been taken away and it's been tapped out. And now you have no resources to give to anybody.
Yeah.
So you get starvation.
Everybody became equal.
Everybody became equal from the bottom.
Yeah.
But the problem is that now there's no initiative because there's no incentive for progress.
Yeah.
And no prosperity. And therefore, socialism in the end must be and always is liberty killing.
Yeah.
And for a libertarian, that's unacceptable.
Yeah. Do you know who Dennis Prager is?
Yes.
He had a really great saying I heard once, like from an interview he gave maybe 10, 11 years ago. And he just said it like this: the bigger the government, the smaller the citizen.
It's kind of like Ronald Reagan's paraphrase of a government that's big enough to give you everything that you want is also big enough to take everything that you need.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. I mean, people are so inactive with like social justice and all the buzzwords that follow with it that everybody's heard now these days.
Right.
I mean,
you must ensure prosperity, bottom line.
Yeah.
And prosperity, especially with our capitalistic system of economics, which to date has been proven to be the best one out there.
I mean, well, yeah, it's obvious. So you can look at how many people can come here, not born here, and just make it. They have to work really, really fucking hard, but they can do it, and they usually do it.
Yeah.
And those are the job creators. Those are the people that seek the opportunity and seize the opportunity.
Because they have initiative.
Because they have initiative.
They take risks.
It came from them.
It came from them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It didn't come from the government. This is the problem with those with the unconstrained vision, is that they really do truly believe in like a trickle-down government. You know how they always say like trickle-down economics and they criticize it, even though really there's no theory called trickle-down economics. Yeah. They really do truly believe in the trickle-down government of things that like, all right, government has to be here, 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 and here in your life. And it's like, no, like you're going to kill my own initiative within me if you're going to stop me at every step of the way. Get out of my way. I need to be the person I need to be. That, in a sense, that really is like American destiny. Like people taking charge of their own life and doing what they want with it. Yeah. If others don't like it, well, then so be it. But people have to take initiative for themselves.
And so I think, pretty much one of the things that we need to make sure of, and this can be almost our concluding or parting thought, is that please stand up for individualism. Don't have this herd mentality.
Yeah.
That's not going to carry you at the end of the day.
I got a question I want to ask. I just thought of right now.
Sure.
With how wild the last month or so has been in terms of like the narrative driving stuff. Do you see a positive so far to 2021 America? I asked you this question privately, but you know this was 2 months ago, and a lot of shit's changed in 2 months.
So we've spent a few $1 trillion on stimmies, stimulus checks. There's talk of student loan discharging. There's talk of re-upping some of the pandemic countermeasures. Mm-hmm. Some of the constraints on our society because of a supposed uptick, especially amongst young people. I think the comforting factor that I see in all of this is that there's a reluctance by the American public at large to go backwards, and that people have definite pandemic fatigue. And as evidenced by even here, just our current governor here in Michigan, her reluctance to impose these measures, even though she ostensibly has the power to do so, but they are so tremendously unpopular that I think the wisdom of the American people is going to carry the day.
Yeah. Because if she wanted to impose it, she would have done it.
She would have done it, but she knows how tremendously unpopular it is.
Yeah.
And at some point, the American public has really come to the realization that they just need to, in spite of every risk, in spite of the overflow in the hospitals and so on, that the hospitals need to take their responsibility and prepare for numbers. They've had time. They've had over a year to do so.
Yeah.
So it's their fault if they don't have the facilities to make sure that they have enough beds, right?
Yeah, it's their responsibility.
It's their responsibility, and that we as American individuals have contributed and done our time to help prepare for this pandemic, and that now it's time for us to return back to normalcy. I think there's a overwhelmingly great buildup of steam for that, and that lust for the return to individual life.
That was a hell of an ending right there.
Thank you.
Nicholas Guibert, thanks for coming on for my first episode. I appreciate it, man. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching.